5, 4. Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Excuse me, I'm going to start that again. You heard that frog in my throat. Oh, okay. We're going to start this in 15 seconds. Excuse me. Oh, my word. And I've learned that you should not clear your throat that way. It's not, well, I'm a trained singer, so that is not what you do. Rubs your vocal folds together. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. There's so much to talk about. Let's talk about our media. They shape our narrative. They really shape how we think. They do. Sometimes, even if we're opposing the narrative that they present to us, they have tremendous power in our lives. And so we need to find out who the owners of media are. We are so curious about our elected officials and our celebrities, but you really need to find out who the owners of media are. You need to know what their motivations are. You need to understand their backgrounds. There's so much that you need to understand about them, and you need to understand what their goals might be. There's no more a fascinating figure than Larry Ellison of Oracle. Now he's famously purchased TikTok. Now, through his son, he's purchased CBS News, and he has a real point of view, and he has a mission. What is it? And some people have even said that he's a shadow president. People as powerful as Larry Ellison do not want to be seen. The most powerful people in the world really try to remain hidden. They do. And but his son is out front, and they become quite powerful in Hollywood, but they're also quite powerful just in our media landscape at a time in which more and more Americans do not trust the corporate media, but they're what we've got. But what's also happening is independent media, but they own the mechanisms by which that independent media is delivered to you. So you really need to understand, because you can get banned on Facebook. You can get banned on YouTube. You can. Who are these people? But let's really look at Larry Ellison today, because he has a very, very definite point of view, Eli Clifton. I know you didn't expect to be back here this quickly, but I said, look, Quincy Institute, I love you guys. And of course, you're an investigative journalist at large at Responsible Statecraft. I just love reading all of your work. And I finally got caught up, because you have been doing such a deep dive on Larry Ellison and Miriam Adelson. But let's look at Larry Ellison today, because I think he bears watching. We really need to understand who he is, and just he's from Chicago. He's a Midwestern guy who did not grow up wealthy, but now he publicly is one of the wealthiest people on earth. Sometimes he's number one, sometimes he's number two, sometimes he's number three, but he is very powerful. And his children are very powerful too. David and Meghan have become powers in Hollywood. But now we're watching, the crown jewel, many people have felt, of American news is CBS, the old home of Walter Cronkite. Well, it is theirs now. What will they do with it? Who is Barry Weiss? Who is she? Bari Weiss. Who is she? What is her mission? But let's go to her boss. I think we need to understand who Larry Ellison is. Welcome to the show. Welcome back home, Eli Clifton. Well, now, after you've been here once, that's what it is.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I want you to help me to understand. I know that's a very, very broad question. But, I guess I can start with this, your latest piece that I've looked at. But I've looked at so many of them from Responsible Statecraft. Oracle execs, love Israel, or maybe this isn't the job for you. Wow. What is going on here? Who is Larry Ellison, and who would make that kind of demand of people in who are supposed to give us the news?
Right. So this was in the context of when I wrote this, of looking more closely at uh, what Oracle as a company's positions have been on Israel. And I was particularly interested in that because and I believe the sale is still pending, but it's understood that it'll probably go through perhaps sometime around the end of the year, where Oracle will lead a consortium of investors to buy TikTok as part of a deal that's been both pressed by Democrats and Republicans over the past couple of years to try to transfer TikTok's ownership away from ByteDance. Now ByteDance is a company with roots in China, um, and that sort of fueled a lot of fears that TikTok and the algorithm that is a key component of it to make it engaging and sticky for users might be used to sort of tweak public opinion in the United States. Might be used to try to shift the viewpoints of Americans, or could be used to take the user data of Americans and use it for some sort of nefarious purposes. And to be clear, I think that there are some roots of legitimate concern there, particularly around the user data. And this is where, and I always want to flag this, that there were proposals out there that were not taken up, but the proposals were saying, you know what, this is a legitimate concern, that user data on social networks, while there are laws about how this data is to be used, how it's supposed to be secured, it's really country to country how that is handled, and that it's a legitimate concern of the U.S. government to maintain that the user data of American users on social networks, of any number of them, should be kept within U.S. jurisdictions, so those laws can be enforced, essentially. And that, as a solution to this fear, was largely ignored, because instead there became this big push to focus exclusively on TikTok, not on any other social networks, and the ways that they could be abused. And this has now led to the situation where there's sort of this forced sale occurring. And the company that has largely stepped up, as I mentioned earlier, is Oracle, whose founder, Larry Ellison, is one of the richest men in the world. And it'll be a massive deal. It'll be a $14 billion deal. Now, Oracle itself, what I find so interesting is that, again, the roots of this sale and why it's happening is to address fears about foreign influence. In the case of the sale, the concern was about Chinese foreign influence. But Oracle, as a company, and its executives have said some pretty extreme things when it comes to issues around the roles of foreign countries, specifically Israel. So much as suggesting that actually promoting Israel and advancing Israel's interest is central to the company's mission. And I particularly want to focus on its former CEO, now I believe she's the executive vice board chair, Safra Katz, an Israeli-American woman, I believe, where she has said that the company's commitment to Israel is, quote, unequivocal. She has said she has blasted employees who may take a different view, saying that when you connect with Oracle, you understand that we are committed to the U.S. and Israel. We are not flexible regarding our mission, and our commitment to Israel is second to none. And there's been reports from employees, both those who like these policies as well as those who find it offensive, that employees at Oracle who express the views that either concern about the company's commitment to Israel or express views that may be counter to that are referred by human resources for mental health counseling and treatment. Now let's take a step back and think about this. This is the company that will effectively be in control of this algorithm that there was so much fear about a foreign country controlling. And here we have top executives at Oracle saying that actually advancing Israel's interest is their top priority. We step over to Larry Ellison, which is where you started this question before I went off on this long diatribe about Oracle and their other executive. But Larry Ellison has been very, very clear that Israel is a core issue for him. He is the top donor to Friends of the Israeli Defense Forces, which contributing tens of millions of dollars to it, which supports members of the IDF. In theory, it can't support the military itself, but you can provide services for members of the IDF, and that is something that Ellison has put a lot of money into. And he's very rarely spoken publicly about his views. But when he has, he's suggested again that Israel is vital interest to him. He's referred to our Israel when talking about his relationship to Israel at a Friends of the IDF fundraiser. So I think what you see here is people not asking the same questions that were applied to ByteDance, which was a company with ties to China, not even necessarily government ties at this level. But in the case of Ellison, you have a company, you have its top executives, you have corporate policies, all of which are explicit about prioritizing Israel's interests. And they stand to be taking control of this really powerful social network that has played a vital role in allowing especially younger people to communicate about the war in Gaza, to share the atrocities that are occurring on the ground to civilians. And there's a lot of questions right now about whether that would continue under Oracle's ownership of the company.
Let me ask you this then. It's more of a philosophical question. Oracle is privately held, and yet it does control a lot of our lives, whether we know it or not. But it's a privately held company. Do they not have a right to hew to a particular point of view?
I think they do. I mean, it's a publicly traded company for whatever that's worth, but even publicly traded companies have a right to hew to a specific point of view. It's a little interesting in the case of a public company because, in theory, the board members have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. And some of the things that Safra Katz and Larry Ellison have said might suggest they feel they have responsibilities to some other entities out there. But I don't think that's going to be a legal challenge to their role at the company. But yes, I think that they are entitled to have that perspective. I do think that in this case, since the topic seems to be national security, that led us to this point with this forced sale of TikTok, that it certainly opens that conversation, I think, a bit more broadly, since the goal and the outcome here seem to be a little bit disconnected. When the goal was to free TikTok supposedly of foreign influence, but it sure sounds like the top executives at Oracle, and again, in their own corporate policies, that they are fulfilling this, make it very clear that advancing Israel's interests, promoting Israel, is core to the company's mission. It seems as if we've sort of jumped from the frying pan into the fire, as it were, without really addressing, well, how can we get ownership of this company? How can this be handled in a manner that will supposedly prevent foreign influence? And again, what about the safety of user data?
Well, and what about that? And what about this philosophy in a time in which more and more Americans, particularly the youth, I mean, it's generationally, young people are gone. And I mean, all the studies show that, all of the polls show that. And I think the longer that the more that we see of Gaza, I think we've seen enough people have now, they have a very different view of Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel. It's very, very different. How will they be able to function in this environment? Because, at the end of the day, corporations really do, what do they say? You rule by consent of the governed. Well, corporations pretty much need the goodwill of their customer base in order to exist. Would you not agree?
Absolutely, especially with something like a social network where people voluntarily choose to opt in or opt out.
So how would this work? I mean, how would they persist? Because Ms. Katz she has, for those people who paid attention, she's been very, very forward about her philosophy. Larry Ellison, all you have to do is read about him. He doesn't have a lot of public pronouncements, right? But everyone knows that he has been very, 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 very supportive of the IDF and of Israel at a time when more and more Americans are questioning our involvement there. So help me to understand, I mean, how they're going to make this work.
Well,
We haven't even gotten to Bari Weiss. We'll get to her at some
I,
point.
I think you're pointing to a really interesting point of tension here, and it's hard for me to see how this uh, doesn't eventually blow up,
Mhm.
uh, because, and you're absolutely right to be focusing on, who are the users of TikTok. Well, TikTok users tend to skew pretty young.
Mhm.
And I was just looking at some polling data here from Pew, and this was in the years between 2022 and 2025, March 2025, for what it matters. Um, and what it showed is that, amongst U.S. adults, there was a 11-point shift of Americans developing unfavorable views toward Israel. That it shifted from 42 to 53%. So the majority shifted. Now, you can start to parse this based off of party identity, and indeed, Republicans tend to tilt more favorably toward Israel. However, there's a key group here, which is young Democrats and young Republicans. And for young Republicans from ages 18 to 49, they moved from 35% holding an unfavorable view of Israel to 50%. So it's reached a tipping point for young Republican voters. Now, for Democrats and those that lean Democratic, it's even more exaggerated. It went from a 62% unfavorable perspective, but that's before the October 7th and before the war in Gaza even started. Nearly 2/3 of young Democrats held a negative view. It has gone up to 71%. So those are the groups that hold some of the highest within each of those respective political parties, the highest unfavorable views of Israel. This is the demographic of people who are using TikTok. So you have a demographic purely by their age alone, putting aside where they fall on the political spectrum, but based on their age alone, they are the most likely group to hold unfavorable views of Israel within their respective political parties. So this is the group that's most active on TikTok. How is that going to work with an ownership group that is dedicated toward advancing Israel's image and Israel's interests? Now, one thing I'd like to point out is that it's not like what you just pointed out. Ellison has been kind of quiet about it. You're absolutely right. When I reached out to Oracle, they wouldn't comment on how it might work with Oracle's control or Safra Katz's involvement with the algorithm that controls TikTok. But what I do think is really, really, really significant is Netanyahu. When he was here in New York, it was just last month, he spoke to a group of influencers who were convened at the mission here in New York. And he said, the most important purchase going on right now is TikTok, number one. And I hope it goes through because it can be consequential. So he's saying the quiet part out loud.
And how is it consequential? How and why?
That is the important follow-up question for him. He seems to feel confident about this.
He's very confident. I mean, and he was sitting in this room ostensibly because that's the voices sounded young, and these were the influencers who, according to the Gray Zone report, uh, were meeting with Charlie Kirk and Bill Ackman in August. Huh. There's so much that's going on. I'm trying to keep it all straight. Um, but he was saying that TikTok we're hoping that that will go through. We believe it will. But he also said we're going to talk to Elon. We want X. How?
Exactly.
I know I keep asking you how is this supposed to work, but I read the comments when I'm watching the podcast, when I'm reading the articles, and when I'm reading your pieces, and people are really beginning to have a very very negative view um, of the Larry Ellisons and the Safra Katzes. But guess what? I think it's not just because they're Israeli Americans or Israelis. We're living in a time when more and more people are asking questions about the oligarchy and about oligarchs, period, and their power. But let's look at him for now. But I think it's important for us to understand the zeitgeist. This moment that we're in, people are questioning everything. I think if you own one thing, people want to know everything that they can about you. But they're buying up so much at one time, Eli. And
Well, but let me just turn that on its head just a little bit, with maybe a slightly more positive perspective on it, which is that I would assume that Larry Ellison hasn't changed his views over the years. Neither has Safra Katz, neither has Benjamin Netanyahu, for that matter. Um, but what they are facing now, and I do believe one of the reasons that we are seeing what we've seen with this desire to control what they perceive to be these social networks or even news organizations that they think are somehow influencing public opinion in manners that they don't approve of, is the fact that public opinion has fundamentally shifted away from where they would like the public to be. So the oligarchy in this case is simply finding that they are losing. And one other data point that I like to point to, it's a smaller thing, it's a much smaller, understandable number. Going back to those influencers who were in the room with Netanyahu, is that we reported on Responsible Statecraft about the fact that for the first time, we've seen Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs engaging with contractors inside the United States, who in turn are filing under the Foreign Agent Registration Act, and saying that they're going to pay influencers $7,000 per post to promote pro-Israel content. Now, that's not to say there weren't efforts to influence social media before that, but in most cases, especially with Israel, that has been done through American donors, American principals overseeing it, and it has not fallen under the purview of the Foreign Agent Registration Act. Now, to me, this is a sign of desperation, that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs realizes they are losing the public relations battle here. The existing mechanisms that they have relied on, which may have been a little outside their direct control, have been insufficient in achieving the public relations goals that they are setting out, that they're trying to achieve, and that this required them to take these initiatives. Another big one that got a lot of attention that we reported on was their effort to geo-target church groups, specifically in the Southwest, and pastors, trying to, and clergy, trying to, with advertising, with, again, geo-targeted ads on the churches that are pro-Israel. This is not steps they've had to take in the past. Maybe there's been some targeting that went on, but it went through American groups that were pro-Israel that have been able to sufficiently convey that message. They are now having to go far more hands-on in this context. And I think perhaps the effort to take over TikTok and the purchase of CBS may all fall in that same category of they are fundamentally losing a political debate, they are losing a culture war, and they're having to throw a lot of money at trying to influence this. But to go back to where we sort of started, public opinion is shifting, and it's shifting really strongly, especially with younger people.
Well, with this purchase, then how might that shape the news? Bari Weiss has never been shy about her point of view, and she is someone who, and I think she's very bright. But unlike, well, I think everyone has a point of view, Eli Clifton. But I think you should at least try to see both sides, or three sides: your side, the other side, and somewhere in the middle. It's kind of Hegelian, my approach. Let's kind of have the mean, the extremes and the mean. That's never been her way of doing things. And Safra Katz has been the same way. I mean, that's what she did with her employees at Oracle, with the employees at Oracle. So how might they shape the news? Because now you're seeing on TikTok, for example, people are now alarmed. And they're saying, I'm going to get off of here because I'm seeing, I'm dealing with restrictions now. And I don't like what's happening. The algorithm is not favoring me anymore. It's disfavoring me. And now with CBS, my goodness, you've seen like this mass fallout at 60 Minutes, which is, the apex of American journalism, television journalism anyway. So help me to understand, how do you think they might shape, how might they deal with this? Because now they don't have the wind at their backs. Now they're up against a headwind.
Yeah, and I think that we started talking about Bari Weiss, and that she is smart and she doesn't conceal her perspective, but there is something a little duplicitous about the argument that she has fundamentally tried to advance through the free press when she was at the New York Times, that's really run through her career, which is she claims that she's an advocate for free speech and that she wants to. And the problem is that specifically usually voices who are critical of Israel, and other some other views on the right, but really she has a focus on Israel, are being canceled or denied the opportunity to present their views. And regardless of how you feel about that, maybe you even agree with that perspective, her solution is very often to try to deny and to delegitimize the society that is critical of Israel, for example. To say that they are inherently anti-Semitic, to say that anti-Zionism or non-Zionism is synonymous with anti-Semitism, to say that anybody who suggests that there's a genocide in Gaza is engaged in conspiracy theories that are anti-Semitic. She really revels in that. And this is where I think there is an enormous amount of consistency across the TikTok purchase, and perhaps, it's a little early to tell, but perhaps in the CBS News purchase as well, which is that this really about opening up debate, or is this about fundamentally constraining the arguments that can be presented, the arguments that are deemed mainstream? And again, why would you come to these conclusions that you need to engage in that level of shutting down debate were it not for the fact that you are fundamentally losing that debate in the court of public opinion? So I think it's important to ask, is this going to be an effective tool for shaping public opinion going forward, or is this perhaps a symptom of some seismic shifts that have occurred within the body politic in this country that might not be so clearly delineated on right-left terms, but are very clear across every single group that you can identify? Again, I go back to that Pew polling, particularly about Israel, by age, by political affiliation. Everybody is shifting, and they're shifting in the same direction. How they feel about the war in Gaza, how they feel about U.S. Unconditional support for Israel.
But it's also, what's also shifting is Americans' trust in corporate media. That's all happening at the same time. So where do you see this going? There's a lot of shifting going on.
Yeah. So I think that to me, when you look at, I'm not as concerned perhaps as some, and this might just be my perspective based on my age, but my assumption is that for a lot of Americans, particularly those who fall into that 18 to 49-year-old group, and I'm thankful I'm still barely inside that, but and I love Pew, by the way, for saying that somehow makes me young.
You're youthful.
But they, a lot of these people are not getting their news from CBS News. Mainstream media has been struggling, and this is not a new phenomenon. This has been going on since sort of the early to mid 2000s, when the advent of the internet really started to raise some questions about, as viewership continued to decline on broadcast news, how do they monetize what is a very expensive news operation? And that has really, really, really profound effects for our democracy, because you do need those levels of resources. You do need those mainstream media publications that are the only ones who can do a certain type of journalism, a certain type of work. That's important, and that has been dying for now a couple of decades, and we need to confront that. But while that has been happening, perhaps even partially because of that, there has been this rise of social media as a news source, particularly for younger people. And that has its own fraught problems in it. I'm not here to defend the concerns or to fight back against the concerns many people legitimately have about social media becoming a news source. But the fact is, it's occurred. And I think that's where you see the targeting and the sort of scapegoating of TikTok for supposedly having radicalized the youth, supposedly for having shifted public opinion. And I think that's frankly just an excuse. Public opinion shifted because of facts on the ground.
Well, yeah, I mean, because there's been an opening on the Middle East for quite some time, for example, and not just on the Middle East, on everything. Eli Clifton, I mean, we focus a lot on Gaza and the West Bank and Israel, and we should. But we have an issue throughout the global South, which is right at our front door, quite frankly. Um, and everything, I guess, everything is shifting. And I want to know from you, where do you see? Um, I mean, what do you think Larry Ellison sees? I know, there's this wonderful podcast from the Daily Beast, Inside Trump's Head. I don't want you to play psychologist, but help me to understand, given your tremendous investigative skills, who is Larry Ellison? What does Larry Ellison want?
Look, I think Larry Ellison wants a couple of things. One is obviously to grow his wealth. I don't think you become the first or second, depending on the day, richest person in the world without that being one of the guiding forces in your life.
Okay.
I just don't think that happens for any other reason. People don't fall into that, having been pursuing another goal. So I actually do wonder, at what point does that become some sort of a guardrail? At what point, assuming, for instance, that CBS News takes a strong tack to the right, I don't know the market forces that well, but I guess I do wonder, is that really something that there's a huge market for, is for broadcast news, one of the major networks, to take on such a very focused sort of political lean, when you can find that already on cable news and in a more refined, sophisticated, consistent manner. Both certainly with Fox News, now you have OAN, you have Newsmax. If that's the perspective you want, that is out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I think the thing it has going for it then is sort of brand recognition, name recognition, and being a broadcast network, with viewership consistently declining. So I guess I do wonder, how well does that fit? How does that fit, assuming that the Free Press, which was Bari Weiss's publication, which has now been rolled into CBS, how does that fit? Because, well, I understand it supposedly had, millions of billions of viewers. It was pretty niche. It was pretty niche. It was focused on culture wars. It was focused on sort of a rightward political lean and a focus on the Middle East and Israel-Palestine. How big is the audience for that, really? Regardless of how you might feel about it, regardless of where you fall on those issues, can you truly scale that up to the level that CBS News operates at even today? I question that. And I think that there's got to be some market forces that will start to come into play here. I'm very curious what ratings do. But I'm not sure if the Free Press on steroids is something that those people who watch the nightly news on CBS or watch 60 Minutes are necessarily looking for.
But $150 million, according to press reports, is what they basically, they gave her that for Free Press. How was that justified? Because for that, what do they want her to do? She said, according to it, apparently some of her staff cheered, others were appalled when she said, just go do the effing news. That's what we're going to do. What is she trying to do? What does she mean? Just go out and do the news.
I'm not sure if she knows.
Oh, okay.
Now, I think that there's an element here where, and I'm speculating, but she is a firebrand, and she has been particularly effective at cultivating relationships with extremely wealthy people, including the Ellisons, who see her as being sort of this youthful activist journalist who has successfully built an online publishing empire with their backing in many cases. And in doing so, I think they see somebody who they want to bet on, sort of in the venture capital mindset. Let's place a bet on Bari Weiss. Now, again, I think it's a huge leap to take somebody who is running a website to making them the head of essentially overseeing the editorial decisions for CBS News. And when she says, let's do the effing news, I don't know if she's ever done the news. She was on the editorial side at the New York Times. The Free Press, she mostly was doing opinion. Again, not that they didn't do some reporting, but it tilted heavy toward opinion. So I'm not. She has very little experience in actual reporting. She has very little experience in being a hands-on editor of reporting, um, and the trajectory that she took was entirely based around being sort of an advocacy opinion analyst, a pundit, something that credit where credit is due. She's been very, very successful at that. But I think it asks it's a very serious question to ask. What is she going to do? Does she know what she doesn't know?
And and again, like you said, market forces being what they are, how will they respond? Because now we can look at the No Kings March. People are becoming hostile, you know, just on all sides.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering just where this is going to go. I mean, when you have, was it Safra Cox who said that we have to embed love for Israel in the United States? What did
Yeah.
she mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, and that was scary. That was when she was, I believe that was from an email I reported on, which she
Yes.
was pitching former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak on signing on as executive producer or something to a show that her sister was developing, which was going to be a reality show about the IDF, but produced for an American audience.
Well, I mean, it's like read the room. That's not what people are buying right now.
Exactly, and it's that perspective. And I think that's a very useful quote you picked out, especially as we talk about CBS and as we talk about TikTok. This notion of we need to embed a love for Israel.
Yes.
That's not how people work. That's not how the American public works. You don't. I understand people can be persuaded, and I understand that marketing can be effective. But I don't think that telling people we need to embed a love for a foreign country in you is a particularly resonant argument.
Well, not when America First is becoming predominant. That's not going to work. Um, and Americans are really looking at bread and butter issues. They're less and less inclined. At least this is my read as I read Pew, and I'm looking at the concerns of Americans. Americans are now frightened to death about their health care. They're trying to figure out if am I still going to have my job? My job doesn't pay me enough. Can I afford groceries? People are now doing what is it? Staggering their payments on groceries. What, like Klarna and Afterpay things like. Americans are really struggling, Eli.
Mhm.
And so, and I know that they're looking for outlets that they can trust. And there used to be a time when at least you had some sense of the common good. I, I, I don't even know if we have the same baseline.
Yeah.
And mind you, we've all had different experiences, but at least when Walter Cronkite put on the helmet, which I don't remember, and certainly you don't, you weren't even born yet. But I don't remember him putting on the helmet and going into Vietnam and saying this is not winnable. And famously, that just changed everything. I don't even know if we have anyone like that now.
Yeah, and I think that I think you're hitting on the public sentiments are towards and I think Trump did tap into it at some level with America First, did
Yeah.
tap into it at some level by saying that the foreign wars the United States has engaged in, certainly post 9/11, have been a very much a waste, have not made us safer, have cost a lot of money, have killed a lot of people. We don't have a lot to show for it. And again, let's pivot back to Bari Weiss. This is somebody who does everything she can to defend U.S. support for Israel, which is pretty much a blank check going to Israel, the largest recipient of American foreign aid, year after year after year, for a deeply unpopular war in Gaza that's killing children and leaving millions of people in famine conditions. And let's zoom out a little more, since that's still a small portion of U.S. expenditure. But let's go over to the defense budget, which is now careening toward $1 trillion. Well, just this week, I believe it was, she was interviewing Palmer Luckey, the CEO and founder of Anduril, a weapons company, sort of in this puff piece interview where they were laughing on the stage. She wasn't posing really critical questions to him, and it sort of looked an awful lot like, in the ways that she was treating him, like it was access journalism. She was giving him a very friendly audience. She was offering very easy questions to him. This is somebody who's deeply unpopular on the left and on the right. He's this defense contractor wearing Hawaiian shirts, talking about how we need more drones to kill people with. He's a strange person and somebody that makes people uncomfortable in the ways that he talks about killing and getting government money, taxpayer dollars, to do so. And this is the type of person that she surrounds herself with. This is the type of person that she's promoting. I think that doesn't really sit that well with sort of the America First movement. I don't think it sits that well with folks on the left or right who are starting to ask these questions about, are my taxpayer dollars going to things that are helping me?
Well, I mean, because I was looking at, I'm telling you, I went down your story like one by one by one. The ethics chief, of CBS, Mr. Weinstein, is it? Kenneth Weinstein. And, more and more Americans are tiring of these wars. I mean, and I think that's part of what was attractive to the American public about President Trump. Whether he did it or not, people really believed that he was going to go in and settle these conflicts and not send anyone else to war. And yet it's the ethics chief at CBS. Would you please explain who he is?
Yeah, so this was something that I don't think any of us saw coming, which is that they will be appointing or have appointed this new ethics chief at CBS News, a guy named Kenneth Weinstein, who you mentioned, who formerly served as the CEO of the Hudson Institute, which is sort of a hawkish think tank in Washington, a sort of right wing, but actually more neoconservative leaning in terms of the foreign policies that it promotes. And this is a think tank that has, and I've written about this a lot over the years, receives a lot of funding, both from foreign governments, which in turn they often produce favorable policy recommendations for the U.S. government about these countries, but also a huge recipient of funding from some of the largest weapons companies in the world. Now, it's kind of shocking to think that that's considered ethical in Washington, but unfortunately it is more common than not. The idea that one needs to proactively disclose these conflicts of interest is something that just doesn't go on, I'm afraid, very often in the think tank space. And at Quincy, we are trying to change that a little bit, saying that just like medical research, you disclose if your research was paid for by a pharmaceutical company, you disclose that up front, and people can take that for what it's worth and take your research for what it's worth. It doesn't disqualify your research, but if you have a potential conflict of interest, you should tell people up front in your research that this money is there. This is something that Hudson largely shied away from under his leadership. And the idea that this person is now in charge of ethics at CBS News.
Ethics. Ethics.
That doesn't sound right.
Wait a minute. What you should and should not do with the news. Help me with this, Eli, because this is, look, I've been dealing with the press all of my life. Trust me, I get it. And everybody's got their biases. I get that. But there ought to be some effort to try to be fair. Goodness gracious, that is not what's happening here. I mean, you have all these people with all of these different ties to the military. I don't see anyone connected. I don't see Medea Benjamin being asked to be an ethics chief. Obviously, I like Medea Benjamin a lot. I mean, no, really. That's not what's happening. I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, because I think of Phil Donahue being fired from MSNBC when they were an emerging network. He had their number one show. They let him go because he was anti-war, and they are military contractors.
Exactly.
Help me.
Well, it's this notion that, and I think that was very consistent with with what happened to Phil Donahue. That it's as long as you are pro military intervention, it's not even being pro military. If you're pro military, you shouldn't want to send them into unnecessary wars that are not vital to our national security.
Right.
But what we see here is this notion that it's not just about that being pro military is very often seen as being synonymous with being pro weapons companies. Which are now, and it wasn't always like this, but they are now the majority. Private contractors are now the majority of where the majority of the funding goes from the defense budget. Mm-hmm. It's not going to paying the salaries of service members. It's not going to paying for food and housing. It's not even going towards sort of a more immediate cost for them. It's going to these private companies. And that's something that at Hudson, they were always very, very, they were very positive towards these contractors. The weapons companies were seen as being sort of these good, and you see it across Washington at think tanks. They are some of the biggest funders of foreign policy and national security research in Washington. And guess what? They very often are the ones funding the research that says that we need to invest billions of dollars in a new generation of nuclear weapons. They're very often the ones saying that we need weapons that are extremely expensive and might not be that reliable and might not be what we actually need for our defense, like the littoral combat ships or the F-35 that have been plagued with problems. And that's a bill that's being, taxpayers are being stuck with that. And you don't see so much critical analysis saying maybe you should cut those programs. Maybe we need to be investing in cheaper, simpler weapons that are not just made by the big five weapons companies. That's not the type of research that comes out. That's not the type of research that Kenneth Weinstein was overseeing at Hudson. It was research that was mostly beneficial to these companies. And the idea that at one level, it's shocking and jarring that he'd be placed as as the ethics czar at CBS News. But at the same time, it's maybe, unfortunately, terribly consistent with the trend that you just identified, which is you're not supposed to ask critical questions. You're not supposed to ask the big questions about U.S. foreign policy. And that's very consistent with the free press and Bari Weiss.
But we're not asking the important questions. We're not asking about this board of peace. We're not asking about why Tony Blair? Why now? We're not asking those questions. And to me, those questions are very consequential. I mean, I was reading this piece, I think it was by Ryan Grimm, who was talking about the shadow president, Larry Ellison, and it painted a very interesting picture, which is one that you've painted, because in all of the articles that I've been reading that you've written, you're in these wonderful investigative pieces, it's like you're pulling blood out of a turnip to get some words from Larry Ellison. He's very, very, he is hidden, and yet he vetted Marco Rubio to become a Secretary of State. That puts him third or fourth in line from the presidency.
Yeah.
And help me, and he sits down with the president and they talk policy. They say he's probably the most influential person, very quietly, well, aside from Marion Adelson, in the administration. What are we looking at?
Well, it actually was scarier than that in terms of what Rubio was being vetted for. It's a little unclear, but what we do know is that he was reporting. Ellison met with Rubio, and that he was reporting back to Israeli diplomats that he thought Rubio was good and was going to be positive. But that was actually in early 2015, which is when, right before Rubio began to run for president. And he had,
let me just jump in here, because Rubio's rise has been meteoric behind that vetting.
Yeah,
I think that there's a connection there, right?
Absolutely. It's hard not to see that. I mean, you at least have to ask the question. This is one of the world's richest people vetting what was then going to be an upstart presidential candidate, and he did reasonably well. Remember, he was actually polling, if I recall, quite well until he was absolutely rolled by Donald Trump, who beat out everybody in the primary field. And apparently he was, and the person vetting him, again, one of the world's richest people, was reporting back to Ron Prosser, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations.
Wait a minute.
What's going on here?
Yeah, not to the United States,
No.
but to another country.
Yeah. It's all well. Listen, rich people, they want to go. Maybe they want to invest in his campaign. Maybe, who knows? But the idea that this vetting was either being done on behalf of the Israelis, or purely, that their interests were so synonymous in the case of Ellison and Oracle and the Israelis that they were, sharing notes about this possible future president. It's just bizarre.
Well, what is our takeaway about Larry Ellison and his son? Because his daughter's in Hollywood, and I get it, she's a creative. I can respect that. But his son has gone from Skydance, which is very, very, very influential, huge media and Hollywood company. They produce a lot of films and documentaries and such. But he's now being moved into another space.
Mhm.
Not that entertainment is not important because it shapes culture. Um, but they're moving in a they're moving very purposefully into very powerful positions, and it would be nice to know who they are and what it is that they want.
I think that that's an incredibly important question. And as you've pointed out, Larry Ellison and his son, for that matter, they don't talk an enormous amount about uh, what agenda they necessarily are trying to drive. But when they have suggested that public opinion about Israel is something they care about an enormous amount, if not one of their top priorities, perhaps their top priority, and that they are moving a lot of money towards their ability to be in a position to control social media discourse and news generation from one of the more legacy mainstream media journalism outlets in this country. And I think we have to, take that for what it is. That they are acquiring mechanisms for some level, and again, I question how effective they may be, but some very expensive level of media access and control, and that they've said through their actions as well as their own words in many cases that Israel is a top priority for them. Again, this is somebody who, as we just talked about, was reporting back to the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations about whether a prospective presidential candidate, U.S. presidential candidate, was desirable. We should believe these people with what they say and what they do.
Look, when people tell you who they are, believe them. I mean, will TikTok survive, do you think?
That's a really good question. I guess I think it depends on. At some point, the Ellisons are going to have to make a decision, is my prediction, about how much influence they want to exert over, be it TikTok or CBS for that matter, and how much money they want to make or lose. Because their exact political ideology, what they prioritize the most, what they seem to value the most, might not be consistent with the market forces, with where their audience is. And at some point, as you just raised the question, will TikTok survive? I don't know. If they decide they're going to really crack down with the algorithm to make it consistent with their political beliefs, be it on domestic or foreign policy issues, I wouldn't be surprised to see a mass exodus of users from the platform, especially young people who have already been on multiple social media platforms and would be open to moving to another one. So I think that they're potentially playing with fire here. And I think that a lot of it is going to come down to their own decisions about, do they want to have a vibrant social media platform? Do they want this to be a place where young people do choose to go to share their views on political issues and current events? Or do they want something that is disciplined and consistent in terms of the content it promotes with the views of the owners? Because I'm not sure if you can have both.
I'm not sure if you can have both. And I think that is the question. And we'll just have to wait to see how this plays out. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Anything that you think we should be on the lookout for?
I think the first indications we'll have of where they're going are with CBS News. And I think the interesting thing to also watch will be the ratings, seeing over the next weeks and months whether CBS News under Bari Weiss's leadership and under the ethics overview of Kenneth Weinstein is going up, down, or holding their ratings numbers.
We will see. This is a fascinating time. What are you working on next, or can you say?
I
For,
can't say right now.
okay, well, I
but
can't
I hope
wait.
you'll all read it and love it.
But I can't wait because I've done a deep dive, and boy, I can go through all of your tremendous work constantly. How can we keep up with you?
responsiblestatecraft.org. That's our publication. Please, please, please do check it out. We're posting all sorts of good news and analysis every single day. And follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Eli Clifton is my handle.
Absolutely. I follow him every day. I want to know what he's talking about. And I go to Responsible Statecraft. This is one of my news sources every day. I want to know one of the things that I love about your institute and Bill and all of my dear friends over there is that you come right down the middle. I really appreciate the fact that you really you do the work, you do the investigating, and you let the chips fall where they may. That's all I ask. Thank you. You investigate and then I can decide. How about that?
Thank you.
Oh, blessings to you, Eli Clifton. I'm Santita Jackson. God bless you, everybody. Have a good one. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Have a great one. Thank you, Eli.
Thank you so much.